webinar, Measuring Assessment in an Online World. For those of you live, you know me and Kris. And we have the other Kris Ryan in the chat as well. I'll be here serving as your host again and just facilitating your questions and really making sure you have all the information you need. Just like we did last time, just remember, please change your chat option to chat to all panelists and attendees, so that way everyone will be able to see your questions. You can also just chat to us as well, but just want to make sure that's an intentional choice. We'll also have Katie WS in the chat as well, supporting you along the way. It's really great to have you here. This is such a timely subject. Today is really about our special guest, Laura Keehan, who is our Executive Director of Assessment here at Kaplan. And really it's about, let's try to solution, right? We have to make sure learning is happening and balancing all the other needs that students have. And Kris Murner, I guess I can just call you Kris today, at least on camera. You pushed for this to happen today rather than any later. And there's probably a really good reason for that, right? You want to take it away?
Yeah, I think, this has been the topic that has come up since we started doing these webinars, right? Which seems like so long ago, but it really, time is just crawling and flying by simultaneously. I've yet to figure it out. What day is it again? I'm so excited we're back here though, because assessment, every day that goes by is a day that, we're getting closer to the end of the school year, and that sort of, oh my goodness, like we have to measure learning. Like we got everything online. We're now engaging with the students. Now how do we know, what they're learning and how they're progressing and all of those things. And so I'm very fortunate to work on Kaplan's learning science team. And my partner in crime, so to speak, we often refer to each other as bookends, with me and instructional design on the front end. Of course, for every great learning objective, you have a great assessment on the other end. And there's nobody better than my colleague, Laura Keehan. She's our Executive Director of Assessment. She's been here a long time, like me, and has a great experience as a teacher as well. And so I couldn't think of anybody better to come on and really address this very important topic with us than Laura. Why don't you introduce yourself and tell everybody a little bit about your background?
Sure. Thank you so much. And wow, what a wonderful intro. Thank you. Yes, I'm so glad to be here. And I've really enjoyed the last couple sessions that you guys have had, and definitely, heard the assessment trending through. So I'm so excited to be here and see where we can help. So as Kris said, my name is Laura Keehan, and I'm the assessment person on the learning science team at KTP. I've been here 17 years, as you can see by my quarantined gray hair, I think, aging me at Kaplan. I have a master's in psychometrics and measurement, and I have been working in various roles at Kaplan for that long on the learning science team, as far as helping our products get our assessment assets improve, working with psychometricians to help use data to help our content folks to improve our content, make sure that our assessments are valid and reliable, they're appropriate, as Kris said, for what we're trying to measure, along various research projects as well that we conduct with the learning analytics team.
That's awesome. And since we've only got about 30 minutes, I want to dive right into it. In fact, can we launch a poll real quick to hear your biggest concerns around assessment? And then, Kris, what have you been hearing? I both of you, I guess. Like I'm sure we've been hearing some stories from teachers and the like.
Yeah, I think in our district, I live in Vermont, and our pre-K to 8 school has sent notice that they're not holding anybody back because there's just not enough information to make those decisions, having lost this very vital part of the school year where everything kind of gels together and you kind of know what you've got moving out of the year, right? So they're not holding anybody back, and I thought that was a really good decision, right, and really proactive. It just means that the fall is what everybody's concerned about now, like we're figured out when we get there, right? We're going to meet your child where they are. We're going to make sure they get what they need. So that's what we're hearing. And I thought that was interesting. What have you heard with your kids in your area, Laura?
Yeah, I think a lot of that concerns around equity issues in technology and help at home. I think adult learners, so I think it's both ends, right? I think there are a lot of children who have parents that are either working or it's tough to help, or they're essential workers. The other way, you have adult students who have children at home now, and that can be a challenge. How can we best measure what we were trying to do and what we have to do by the end of the year, but in this kind of new online arena?
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. Let's take a look at the results, and please let us know your questions as we are, talking. And I think we probably suspected this would happen, but cheating is definitely the most. Yeah, the fidelity. Let's talk about that, and then we'll move into talking about just moving them online. Period. Like, what are some things we can do? So what are some solutions? How do we address cheating? What can we give some context and then dive into that further?
Sure. I think cheating is a huge concern, regardless of the level of students that you're educating. I think there are lots of different ways to kind of alternate assessment. There it depends on, and again, we always talk about the purpose and the learning objectives, starting with how you assess, and it's no different now. You can go to an open book kind of assessment that might help with higher level thinking and higher order content. So, the facts, the rote understanding is in an open book that your student has with them, but you're asking them, maybe short answer or essay questions, that get to how they're actually really critically thinking about the content that you're trying to make sure that they understand and know. I know that a lot of times there can also be one-on-ones or small groups. The students might have something in front of them, and that's fine. But, if you're asking them, in a 10-minute short seminar with 5 students, a small breakout group of students, you can gauge participation that way. You can gauge understanding of, again, kind of higher order concepts, but rote as well. And especially if I know that some of my kids have requirements for on-screen for certain portions of conversations. You clearly want to be cautious of privacy issues, technology availability issues, and things like that. But those are a couple ways that I've seen folks kind of get around cheating. For an institution-wide solution, there's also a lot of companies out there that are doing remote proctoring. And we certainly have a lot of university partners that we have seen use, browser lockers. So, the student will download the program on their computer. They're taking an assessment online. It will lock their browser down so that they cannot, at the very least, go between, to somewhere else to look something up on the computer. Kristen, I know you've had a little experience with this as well.
Yeah, and I think, the thing about it is there's probably not the cheat proof test, right? As much as we like to think that there is, as clever as technology companies are, a motivated student will be way more clever when motivated, right? I remember the first time I went and heard from a nursing dean that they had a student who, the only male student in the class, who kept excusing himself to go to the bathroom, knowing that there couldn't be anybody that followed him in there, and managed to copy all sorts of stuff and had his textbooks actually hidden in the restroom. Had a hole in his scrubs and kept moving this hole around on his thigh to get to the information that he had written. So, there's all sorts of weird things that students will do. I think, mixing it up makes good sense. The remote proctoring can be a solution, but it also, opens up sort of the storage of that information, where there's recording of a student's in a home environment. Also, a lot of times we use remote proctoring in a computer lab on campus. Well, that's not an option, right? So now there's the privacy violation of their home. There's all that data that's collected and stored, and what are you going to do about that? So, if you're looking at implementing that at an institution of higher that hasn't done it before, you're going to need to talk to leadership and legal and those sorts of things to make sure that data consideration is taken care of. No doubt your vendors have seen those before, so talk to them if you have concerns as well. But there's a lot of different things you can do to be creative, but when it's at scale, it's definitely a challenge. I think your best bet is probably to do a lot of scrambling of answer choices and keep the time as short as it can be, and make sure that you don't give them the opportunity to do too much off camera without supervision that could get them into trouble later.
Yeah, and I think you just reminded me of, I know that a lot of learning management systems that you probably were already using, during the school year anyway, have options for creating a multiple choice, open, short answer type assessment that could be delivered online. I think certain things like, if it's possible, having a time frame window for when that test is open and then closed, The challenge there is the availability of your students to have their technology and be able to sit in a quiet space with, being stuck in a home with whoever else is there. That said, if you can get at least, kind of like a time frame to open and close the test, that can also help kind of cut down on that as well.
Yeah, can I ask you about how the AP is doing it? I thought their take was interesting. They've taken a test that was predominantly multiple choice, and now have moved to a free response questions only, right? And they give you 45 minutes, a time window in which I guess they've made it open book, right? So there's certain elements here that I'm sure students are happier about, but also 45 minutes to submit your answer, and they've made it so you can, I think, take a picture of something you've written out on paper, right? Can we talk about that a little bit further? That was an interesting solution, I thought, to a difficult problem.
Yeah, and having just worked on our response to that from Kaplan, I'll start and then pass to Laura, who can talk about the scoring and all that good stuff. But they've always had free response on the
Right.
AP. This is nothing new. Students have been practicing this all year. And the time window is actually the same for those responses. The difference is you've got to upload it, hope your technology works, and get your next prompt if you're taking one of the exams that has two. Some of them only have one. It is an interesting solution to a large scale problem, right? APs are huge. They're used for college credit. There are high stakes for students. They only take them once. You don't want to sit for this exam a year after you finish the coursework. That's impractical. And that being said, the College Board, I sat on their webinar last week for parents because I have a son that's taking this right now. And they really are trying to make the best of the situation, right? Students have already prepared for this, and this gives an opportunity to go forward and show them what they know. I think there's no doubt that it's stressful. They have made concessions for if you have technology issues, there's a makeup date for that, but you do have to start the exam in May. And then if you really feel like you can't do it for health reasons or whatever, they are allowing students to then get credit to take the CLEP test at whatever university at which they matriculate later, to see if they can go ahead and get credit that way by CLEP when they actually become a university student. So that, and this is actually something they've done for students that have been in crisis before. I've given this short form exam before, so they were prepared to do this. It's just something not a lot of people were familiar with that. I know score-wise, parents were concerned though, Laura, and I'm not too far off of that with my son.
Yeah, and I think just there are things that we can and can't know from a legal and ethical standpoint, right? But what I do know is that they do have a crew, humongous of psychometricians that will ensure, I'm sure, that that the scoring and the procedures are reliable and valid, and comparable in some way to what's been done in the past and what we'll see will have to be done in the future too. But yeah, I mean, it's definitely a challenge, and I think that they're rolling with it as quickly and as appropriately as they can.
Yeah, I want to hear from the audience. We specifically invited you as past attendees and we wanted to keep it a very intimate, small group to hopefully spur some discussion. I think along those lines, what are your thoughts on maybe having students show their work? I know maybe that's something we haven't really looked at closely in the past, but if it is open book and if there are multiple steps a student needs to take or link different ideas together within, I know it'll differ across subjects, but can we get to maybe even some other potential solutions for bringing something online while still being able to ensure a student is presenting their own work? What are some other, again, a free response question could be a great way, because then maybe you can, if you're really suspicious, run their text through, a Google search or whatever it is. What are some other ways to ensure, and I'll just add if the students are actually doing the work, I mean, we can get to this later, Kris, but I know you've talked a lot about are we even really thinking about measuring the right things? Do we ever, our
Right.
hearts in the right place? But anyway, let's start with the first part. What are some of the other things you could do, I think, to...
Yeah, I'd be interested to know from the folks that are here, are you guys using video, right? We tend to have folks in the medical education realm here of different sorts. And I know a lot of these things are clinical competencies or skills or things like that. And would love to hear how you're addressing this with your population. We've seen different ways of students sort of recording themselves doing a skill or conducting a type of exam and then going for backwards and looking at it again and then saying, I did this right and I did this wrong. And, the faculty provide rubrics so they can kind of self-grade and then compare with the faculty in a debrief. It's not quite as great as doing it with somebody watching them at the time, but I'd just be curious if anybody's doing that as well.
Ooh, I saw some interesting things in the chat, and Laura, I'd love to get your thoughts here. Pedro mentioned an audio component that allows students to record their answer that they work. That's actually really, really interesting. Susan also brings up an excellent point. Show all work in math, free response, but how it can be a challenge to grade online, which totally makes sense, right? Just given how you need to be able to scale this out. Yeah, please go ahead. RP now is, please go ahead.
Yeah, I actually think the audio and video component can be a win for a lot of reasons. One is that whole talking through, and you can really get their thought process of, how they're solving a problem, or, how they got through something. The other that I've noticed just with my children's teachers is that kind of personal connection that we're not getting as much of that we used to necessarily. I know that a lot of times, my children will submit something in video or audio through, a Google form or whatever their LMS site, and the response from the teacher will also be audio or video. And I think that kind of connection on both ways, right? She can explain to him more specifically some of the places where he missed, and cheer him on where some of the places, where he was successful. And so I think that audio video is not only a good way to get at their critical thinking, but also kind of, for the socio-emotional, just to kind of have that connection that I think a lot of especially younger students are missing. But to be honest, as an adult educator, I would love to hear from a teacher as well. Let's see, the audio and, the showing the work. We've also been taking pictures actually and submitting that way, depending on the content. So I think it's a lot, right? It's a lot for the teacher. It's a lot, it's different type of evaluation. It's different type of time. It's different type of your time than when you've been in the classroom evaluating work. But I think that these can be ways to get at these more complicated learning objectives that Kristen was mentioning before, with this more critical thinking and the more deeper analysis.
I think you almost, I was just writing back to Michelle, who had talked about how, just tell me everything you can, right? So you're going to assume they have Google. Let's just throw it out there, right? They're going to look it up. So what kind of question can you write that it doesn't matter? And that's kind of what the gentleman that presented for College Board last week was talking about with AP, right? Yeah, it's open book, like go for it, but it's timed. So, you can Google it, but you're not going to come up with an answer. And by golly, if we find out you're cheating, we're going to cancel your score and you're done. So, the caution is there. And, I remember when I was an undergrad, I was a physics major, and all of our tests were open book. And they used to say, yeah, because it doesn't matter. You can use all the books you want. It's not going to help. And I think that's kind of the way you need to look at it, right? You have the world at your fingertips on your computer and nobody's watching you. Like, you could do that. But wouldn't it be better to reflect and create a question that makes you really get into the head of the student, like Michelle had said here, what do you think about when you see this patient and what are you going to do? And I think you want to get to that higher level thinking of what are you going to do and what are you going to do first, right? And getting them there and moving them along that continuum when you can't always show them hands-on is so important.
Makes a ton of sense. And I love KDWS's earlier point also is this could be a cool opportunity for them to learn how to cite sources properly as they draw information from different places to get the answer.
Dennis, and Susan, I just noticed on the side. Yeah. I know, sorry, no, I just saw another one that made me think back. My undergrad was elementary ed, and so some folks are making me think back to that as well, which is Susan said that she has students design their own problems and provide answers as well. And what a great way to get at even writing the problem, right? I mean, what goes into writing some of these higher order questions, and if your students are having to write one. And I can even remember in my teaching days way back when, having students, provide for each other, make a one-on-one or a two-on-two, and provide questions for each other, and then the answers, and and then the full response. So yeah, what a great way to get to that higher order thinking as well.
I love that. And then just one more, Marla mentioned questions that ask students to take a stand on an issue and defend their position work well also. In fact, let me take that opportunity to pivot us with about 10 minutes to go. And we can stay a little longer as well. I know we thought this might spike conversation, so that's great. So we're happy to stay as long as you all have the time. But keeping the cheating aspect in mind, right? And the next important concern that the faculty here had was about bringing these assessments online. And there are different components of that, right? Like, what are the most important priorities? Maybe that's the question I want to ask, and then the audience can steer me otherwise. But like, should we be worried about a really fair quantitative scale to be able to measure students on? Like, is that the outcome we're looking for? Is it what you just mentioned in the chat, Kris, about teaching skills beyond the question? Like what should I be, if I was a faculty and I'm bringing this online? What are my priorities? What should I be really thinking about here, especially during all this?
I think for me, it would be what is the best way to assess the content I have to assess, and who are my students? So, an essay sounds like a great idea until you've got 175 students in a lecture hall, to grade. Multiple choice sounds great until you need to show your work, for a calculus question. So I think it depends on that. But I think using the tools you already have. So, if you already have an LMS that's been in place, not only are you more familiar with it because you've been using it all year, chances are if the students interact with it as well, they will be more comfortable, and that whole technology nervousness, will settle, or it just won't be a factor, hopefully. But also, so for me, it's more about the content, what's most important, because there are truly, there's a lot required. But thinking about, in kind of this new world, what's really required, and what did you think? And I think to be honest, it's going back to, what are you spending time teaching? Did you have an hour session 2 days a week and you didn't even touch this? So if you didn't get to it in a session or in a lesson, maybe it's okay to leave that off, or have it be extra work, or an extra assignment for students to go research on their own. And also, I think making sure that you understand, for me, where the students are coming from and where you are coming from. So this is different, and this is a lot of work. And take it as someone who's been working from home for almost 10 years now. Everyone says, oh, you don't have to commute, you can save all that time. But your work is always there now. It doesn't go away. You don't leave it. It's always right there down the hall, staring at you from the kitchen, or maybe it is your kitchen. So I think also it's making sure, that the time needed is, you're all committed to your students. We know that. You wouldn't be here. You wouldn't be asking questions. You wouldn't be concerned if you weren't. And to be honest, in this industry, I think if you weren't. And so I think also just trusting yourself that you know what you are prioritizing and how you can get at that with your students, and that you know a lot more about your students than you think, probably from spending time with them before everyone had to remote and be home, and thinking about kind of that observational data that you would do in a classroom anyway. I know when my kids are on their Zoom meeting with their teachers, she's in the full view, and she even says, I see that so-and-so is paying attention. I see that so-and-so is writing that down. Clearly for a younger audience, but there are observations that you can make across the board, when you're online as well, that could be data points for, as far as how students are getting it.
That's awesome. Kris? Yeah.
And I know, Laura, you've often made the point about, there are things that, online can do well, and things that you can do well in the classroom, and you need to just be choosy. And, I know last time I taught, the curriculum I had came with assessments. And so, my job was to teach the information and use the assessments, and that seemed all great. But those assessments I would never use online. If I think back to what they just aren't suited for that. That's not the purpose that they were built for. And I think, looking at the chat and talking about, I didn't know if my students were engaging with video lectures, so I moved to Zoom, and that can make you nervous as an instructor if you haven't ever taught online, like, learning how to engage them and learning how to keep everybody on mute and learning how to, work the bells and whistles. But being able to get their sort of as they go thumbs up sort of a thing, which, you were just talking about getting in the classroom. We talked a little bit about video, talked a little bit about audio, and I think probably my favorite thing that we have a blog post going out tomorrow that we'll attach this video to, but Laura wrote this great post. And one of the things you said is that an assessment doesn't have to be a test. And I think as educators, we can get pigeonholed into thinking it does because you have to submit scores and you have to have your grade book and you have to do all these things. Well, now it's a little different and you still need data, but what else would you say in terms of being creative with online?
Yeah, I think depending on your institution, I think some are issuing grades and are, pass fail based on certain other things. Some are still holding to grades, but they're adjusting requirements and kind of giving faculty and teachers a little more leeway as to what those grades mean. So I think, first and foremost, just make sure that you're adhering, of course, to what your institution's policies are or going to be. Of course, coming to you from Charlotte, North Carolina, where they have not yet decided what they're doing for grades. But so when you're in the weeds and, trying to figure out something else, yeah, I mean, I think that the data points may be just different. It could be, some of these kind of more project-based and conversation-based things that can be done. I think it's just important to make sure that you have a clear rubric in mind ahead of time to know what you're looking for. And then that makes something that might be project and a little more, subjective, a little more objective and able to be graded. Because if you know ahead of time what you're looking for and what's important in any sort of response, also if that is shared with the students ahead of time so that they know what's expected of them, you can be fair, you can be comprehensive, and you can be scaled across and reliable across all of your students if you can create a decent, clear enough and detailed enough rubric to know what you're looking for. You could even, Kristen and I were talking about this morning, actually, you could make it a Google Sheet and just, then you do it once. You've got columns for each of your students, go through as a checklist as you're talking to them. They don't even have to realize that you're off screen if you're doing, a conversation or if you're in a small group or listening to an audio or video presentation, reading an essay, that kind of thing.
That's awesome. Okay, so we've got 3 minutes before the top of the hour. Again, we can stay a little longer. I just want to sum it up for those who have to leave at 4. So far, we've heard, let make sure I don't miss anything, right? We've talked about open-ended responses, multiple choices that can be mixed around, depending on your LMS or your university. Definitely reach out for help. They may be eating the cost of RP Now or other proctoring programs out there. It could be, we heard about audio, video components. That could be really interesting methods. Whiteboard sharing is something that Pedro just brought up. And then just remember, this could go beyond just getting an assessment out there, right? Or a test for that matter. It could be helpful in helping students trust their holistic response or citing sources. There's just a lot. There's a world of assessment that goes beyond tests, and I think that's what you're really trying to get to this group, Laura, and something that we'd love to help with. So again, please engage us if you have any specific or individual questions. That goes for anyone who's watching this on video as well. Live online support at kaplan.com is where we can definitely connect you to Laura and to other resources where we'd love to be part of the solution. We'd love to help you brainstorm and really figure out what it is we can do to help you during this time. And then, Kris, I want to take it back to you for a moment here as part of closing thoughts. You've told me multiple times that we again have to really also consider the student's situation and kind of what they're going through currently as well. And I know next week on the 30th, we'll talk more about, in his little teaser, about how to reach out to those students who may have fallen off the radar a bit. But how do we incorporate their feelings, I guess, as part of this whole assessment track? Well, I just want to make sure you get that opportunity.
Yeah, I think, we've said, Maslow over Bloom and these a couple of different times, right? Where we really need to be considerate that everybody's under stress. And as this goes on, the emotions change every day, right? Feels like Groundhog Day, everything's the same, but it's not, right? And the longer this goes on and the way things change in your given area, it does really matter that we meet students where they are at a given time. And as regards assessment, sometimes that means being more flexible than you would be normally in terms of extensions and understanding and compassion. You want your students to give you some grace as you're learning. They're learning this technology and this whole way of working too. So I think that's really important. And the other thing is to just think about how you're assessing and what you're designing for your students to do in the first place. It can't always be the same. Like some things just don't translate to online well. That's okay. Think about how to make it different. Think about how to make it fun where you can. A test isn't fun when you say that word, but if you say recorded video, it sounds a little better, right? Even if it is being used for assessment, and depending on the activity you design particularly. But I think there's a lot of ways to be creative in this in a way where you probably couldn't have been in the classroom, and we should take that opportunity where we can.
Yeah, Laura, any final thoughts before we let everyone go?
Yeah, no, I mean, I just think, that's the most important thing is like, just knowing that we're in kind of a different place right now, on your side and your student side. I think that from what I've seen, students are being very understanding of stuff that's popped up with teachers and vice versa. So I just think that, trust that your students, trust that you did spend time with them before all of this happened, and that you do have a pretty good gauge on them. And just use the technology to your advantage and get creative. As Dennis said, we would love to help, but I think coming in the blog tomorrow, I'm always impressed about the creativity that comes out of chaos. I was just talking about this last night, and it's we can we can use the technology, we can use free things, we can use a phone to record something and send it to a student. So it doesn't have to be fancy, it doesn't have to be savvy, but I think just reaching out and the connections with your students are the most important, and can really go far.
That's awesome. Thank you again for joining us. Laura's blog hits this week. Definitely check it out. It has even more thoughts on this subject. We hope we can help. And again, reach out to us individually if there's something we can do. Thank you, Kris, as always. And thank you, Kris Ryan and KDWS in the chat. We'll see you next week, hopefully, if you'll join us. We're going to talk more about how we reach out to students who, well, all students really, and really get them engaged outside the classroom as well. In the meantime, be safe, be well, have a great week, and we will see you soon. This is Dennis, Kris, and Laura signing off. We'll see you next time.